America had survived, but it had not yet healed. The Civil War was over, the Union had been preserved, and slavery had been abolished. Yet half the nation lay in ruins, and millions faced an uncertain future. Returning soldiers no longer faced battlefields. They returned to shattered homes, ruined towns, and an economy that had completely collapsed. The Old South had disappeared forever. Nearly 4 million formerly enslaved people were now free. But freedom did not guarantee security. America was about to begin the greatest Reconstruction project in its history. The decisions made over the next 3 decades would not only reshape America, they would transform the balance of power across the entire world. How did a nation rise from the ashes of civil war to become the world's greatest industrial and economic power? America's greatest transformation begins now. With the Civil War over, America faced one critical question. How would the defeated South return to the Union? President Andrew Johnson sought to reunite the nation as quickly as possible. Johnson proposed allowing the former Confederate states to rejoin the Union after pledging loyalty. But in Washington, many believed the South should face much harsher consequences. Radical Republicans argued that allowing the South to return unchanged would make the sacrifices of the war meaningless. Reconstruction had become not just a rebuilding effort, but a fierce political battle. America stood between 2 futures. One sought to restore the old order, while the other aimed to build an entirely new nation. The struggle between them would shape the country's destiny for decades to come. Nearly 4 million people were finally free, but freedom offered neither land nor security. For many, life had to begin again from nothing. Through the Freedmen's Bureau, the federal government established schools, hospitals, and support programs to help formerly enslaved people build new lives. Many southern states resisted these changes. New laws known as the Black Codes sought to restrict the freedoms that had only just been won. Slavery had ended, but the struggle for equality was only beginning. America's future would now be decided not only on battlefields, but in its laws and its society. In 1866, a dangerous new organization emerged across the South. The Ku Klux Klan used violence and intimidation to stop Reconstruction and restore the old order. Many freed people were threatened, attacked, and prevented from voting. Restoring peace across the South would prove far more difficult than anyone had imagined. Meanwhile, another battle unfolded in Washington. Fierce clashes between President Andrew Johnson and Congress reshaped the future of Reconstruction. Yet, amid the political turmoil, America was quietly transforming. Railroads stretched across the continent, factories multiplied, and a new industrial age was beginning. Even before the scars of the Civil War had fully healed, America entered a new era. Factories multiplied, steel production soared, and the nation experienced an industrial revolution unlike anything in its history. Railroads linked the East and West. Thousands of miles of new tracks accelerated trade, and America began to unite into a single economic powerhouse. Andrew Carnegie built a steel empire, while John D. Rockefeller dominated the oil industry. America was no longer simply recovering, it was preparing to become one of the world's economic leaders. New cities rose across the nation, and millions flocked to industrial centers in search of opportunity. America's rise now seemed unstoppable. As industry expanded, America's demand for workers grew rapidly. Millions crossed the Atlantic from Europe, hoping to build a better life in the United States. For many, the first stop was Ellis Island. After medical inspections and registration, the doors to a new life finally opened. Italians, Irish, Germans, Eastern Europeans, and many others settled in America's rapidly growing cities, helping fuel the nation's economic expansion. Within just a few decades, America had become one of the fastest-growing economies on Earth. The nation's ambitions were no longer limited to its own borders; they were beginning to reach across the world. By the late 19th century, America had entered an era of extraordinary wealth, but prosperity was far from equal. While industrialists built vast fortunes, millions of workers struggled under harsh conditions. Factories operated day and night, and production expanded at an astonishing pace. America was rapidly becoming one of the world's greatest industrial powers. Figures like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan did more than build companies. They helped shape the foundations of the modern American economy. Their fortunes rivaled the wealth of entire nations. America was no longer growing only within its own borders. Its booming economy and industry were expanding its influence across global trade. Soon, that economic strength would evolve into military and political power. In 1898, the battleship USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor. Although the exact cause was never proven, the disaster ignited a wave of outrage across the United States. Newspapers demanded action. Soon, the United States declared war on Spain, opening a new chapter in its role on the world stage. The war lasted only a few months. The United States Navy decisively defeated the Spanish fleet, securing a victory that surprised the world. Following the victory, the United States gained control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. America was no longer just a continental nation. It had become an emerging global power. When Theodore Roosevelt became president in 1901, America entered a new era. Young, energetic, and determined, he sought to strengthen the nation's economic, political, and military power. Roosevelt launched reforms to challenge the unchecked power of giant corporations. He believed the federal government should play a stronger role in protecting the public interest. At the same time, Roosevelt modernized the U.S. Navy. The voyage of the Great White Fleet sent a clear message that America had become a global naval power. America's ambitions now stretched far beyond its own continent. To secure global trade and move its navy more efficiently, an even greater project was about to begin. At the beginning of the 20th century, America launched one of the greatest engineering projects in history. The goal was to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through a single canal. After years of difficult construction, the Panama Canal was completed. It became a strategic landmark that transformed global maritime trade. American warships and merchant vessels no longer needed to sail around South America. The canal dramatically expanded America's global reach. As America grew stronger, Europe was drifting toward a crisis. A great war was about to erupt, one that would change not only Europe, but America's future as well. In 1914, Europe descended into one of the greatest wars in history. Across the Atlantic, the United States chose to remain neutral during the conflict's early years. Although officially neutral, American factories operated at full capacity. Weapons, supplies, and industrial goods shipped to Europe fueled an economic boom at home. In 1917, President Woodrow Wilson declared that the time had come for America to enter the war. It was a decision that would permanently transform the nation's role in world affairs. By the end of the war, the United States had proven not only its military strength, but also its economic and diplomatic influence. America was emerging as one of the leading powers of the new century. After the war, America entered an era of extraordinary economic growth. Factories operated at full speed, cities reached toward the sky, and the nation embraced a new age of prosperity. Henry Ford's assembly line made automobiles affordable for millions. Technology and mass production were transforming everyday life at an unprecedented pace. Jazz flourished, cinema expanded, and modern consumer culture was born. This remarkable decade became known as the Roaring Twenties. Beneath the prosperity, the economy had become dangerously fragile. The soaring stock market was quietly setting the stage for a crisis that would change millions of lives. On October 29, 1929, Wall Street collapsed. Within hours, billions of dollars vanished, triggering one of the worst economic disasters in American history. Thousands of businesses failed, banks closed, millions lost their jobs, and families depended on bread lines and soup kitchens just to survive. The nation that had once led the world's economic boom was now trapped in a devastating depression. America's future suddenly seemed uncertain. Just as hope seemed lost, a new leader emerged. Franklin D. Roosevelt promised to rebuild the nation, preparing to launch reforms that would change America's future forever. When Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in 1933, America was still trapped in the Great Depression, but the new president believed the nation could recover. Through the New Deal, millions found work building dams, roads, bridges, and public projects that reshaped the nation. As the economy slowly recovered, confidence returned. America had begun to find its way out of the worst economic crisis in its history. While America was recovering, the rest of the world was moving toward another war. Rising tensions in Europe and Asia signaled a global conflict that would soon change history once again. On December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor ended America's neutrality. The United States was now fully involved in the Second World War. American industry rapidly shifted to wartime production. Factories operated around the clock, turning the nation into the industrial backbone of the Allied war effort. After the war, a new world order emerged. The United States was no longer just a powerful nation, it had become one of the leading forces in global politics and economics. In less than 80 years, America had transformed from a nation scarred by civil war into one of the world's greatest powers. But its story was far from over. New challenges and global rivalries would continue to shape its future. America's rise was more than the story of one nation. It helped shape the 20th century and the modern world. In our next documentary, we'll witness how these events transformed history on a global scale.